All right, so let's first look, and we were kind of teaching this in our young adult class when we're talking about studying the Bible. The best way to do it, when I begin to read 1 John, if I'm going to be doing an in-depth study of this book, I need to know a little bit about it. So let's look at the author, which many of us are like, well, obviously it's John. But we don't have the author mentioned in any of 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. We don't have the author mentioned in the Gospel according to John. We have him mentioned in the Revelation. So these are all the same man, right? John, the son of Zebedee, is what we're going to get into here in just a moment. But what helps us in looking at this is, all right, I've missed a slide. Sorry about that. I will say this. Again, this will be the next point. But there are many ancient authorities that point toward John being the author. Now, when I say that, you may have heard of, like Polycarp and Papias, those kind of men. Probably heard of Polycarp. The idea that he was a disciple of John. And we're going to get into that here in just a minute, that John died of natural causes. He was the only apostle that did not die by being martyred. Many of the other, all the other disciples, or the other apostles, were killed, right? Beheaded, crucified, you name it, sawed in half. It was really bad for these men. But that's how they all died. John was the only one that was able to die of natural causes. So when we look at this, the reason him being an older man, he had pupils, people under him that he would be teaching. So those men would be writing. Again, when we look at like Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, Irenaeus, Origen, those kind of men, you've probably heard that maybe if you've ever looked at like what we would call the early church fathers or the apostolic fathers. You've probably heard of especially like Clement of Alexandria and Origen, Irenaeus, those kind of men. The idea is we don't look at those men as scripturally, Holy Spirit inspired men. It's more along the line of they were just men that were there, right? And we can take what they say and we say, all right, they claim this, they make this claim, but there is some validity to what they claim through that. Again, we don't base a lot of stuff off of these men. We just kind of look to them as well. I know a man, I was listening to a debate just the other day, and that's what he was kind of leaning pretty heavy on these men, and they're like, look, do you think of them as scripturally authoritative? And he's like, well, no, they were there, and we just kind of look to them at that, but we don't take them as, the same as like the inspired writers of the Bible. But nonetheless, these men attribute John as the author, and we can take that for what it is, in that they were there, they were present, we have their writings, so we can confirm John being the writer. So if we have John confirmed as the writer of 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John, then we go back over to the Gospel according to John. That's what I shouldn't have said the Gospel of John, sorry. It's the Gospel of Jesus according to John, his account of that, so apologize for that typo. But there's a lot of close similarities. When we begin to read 1 John, and you begin to read the Gospel of John, he's going to have a lot of similarities. In fact, Brother Woods made this comment in his commentary that of the 295 different words in 1 John, only 69 are not in the Gospel of John. So when we talk about inspiration, yes, God was the author. He was he was inspiring these men, but these men were using their vocabulary. Obviously, if they weren't using their vocabulary, it would be just like reading a book or a dictionary with the idea that they were just, they would just say it, right, and say it like normal. They wouldn't, have a different appeal to it or a different way of saying it. So that's what we have to watch when we read. Again, God's the author, but through John, through his vocabulary, through his background, he is able to write these letters, and that's how we kind of put them together. So, when we begin to look at this, again, here we have it, that the Gospel according to John, written after the life of Jesus. And what we'll find is when you look at the synoptic Gospels, again, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they line up very well. They kind of start out the same way, go through everything the same way, go down through there. But then when you get to John he doesn't really follow a lot of that stuff. So he's going to be writing this a lot later in life. Typically, we attribute Mark having the first, he jots it down first. If you read Mark, everything's immediately, and now, then. And then, when you read Mark, he's in a hurry. He's jotting this stuff down, trying to get this letter out. Matthew writes it more in a standpoint of a Jew, trying to help the Jews to understand who Jesus was. Luke writes it from a Gentile's perspective. And then we have John writing this, and he has just a whole other kind of look on this events of Jesus being here. 1st and 2nd, 3rd John, they were written by an older apostle. When we begin to read this book, many attribute through tradition that he had gone from Patmos to Ephesus. So we're studying the book of Ephesians in class. We're starting that. So John, he is exiled. He's been boiled in oil. Again, just like it sounds, like a deep fryer. He's been boiled in oil. He's been exiled to Patmos. There he pens the letter of the Revelation, and then many look at it as after that he's coming back to Ephesus and writing 1st and 2nd, 3rd John. Perhaps that's the case. Maybe he wrote it before going to exile. It doesn't really matter that much of it, but it does seem like he's an older man writing to faithful Christians that he'll say a lot of like, I'm the father, my children, kind of things like that. He'll use children, and we'll see that in just a moment as well. He'll use children quite a bit. Again, Revelation was written on exile when he's on Patmos. There. So same writer. I know Scarlett's not in here. I guess she's teaching. But when you say John, you got to make sure you remember who John is and what's going on with him, because little common name. So that's the same guy, right? Same man, one of the apostles. All right, any questions, comments so far? All right, let's look at the background of John, the person. So this is going to help us when we begin to read about him. So he's a prominent businessman. We know this because when you read in the gospel accounts in like Mark and in Luke, that he is in business with, he's got his father Zebedee, James and John. So typically, John's probably the younger of the brothers because James is mentioned first just about every time. So John being the younger, but they're in partnership with Simon, Peter. They're in a partnership with him. So the fact that they were fishermen, and again to upset the cost of the boat and the nets. Remember, they're all the time mending their nets, having to fix those, selling those fish, again, around that area. The idea that they were probably pretty prominent because of a family business, and they had hired servants. So that's a big deal. I guess it would be kind of like the farming community today. Some men, they just have their families that run the farms, and then, if you can outsource that, say, okay, well, they're maybe doing pretty good if they can hire people to work as well. So it appears as such that John was of a pretty prominent business family there in that area because he was able to do that. Not only that, we find that he owned property. In John 19:27, when Jesus is being crucified, he tells John, behold thy mother, behold thy son. So he's telling John to take care of his mother. So he says that he carried him back to his own house. So John owned property in that. He knew the high priest. When we go to the account there in John 18:15 in the gospel account, that he goes in, again, he doesn't mention himself by name, but one whom Jesus loved, right? He knew the high priest. Some men look at that his family was prominent enough in that area that the people coming and buying in the markets, again, the fish to eat and things like that, that's how he knew the high priest so well. That's a good possibility, all right? Maybe by having a successful business in that sense. Again, it's important to note that John was a good man, but he wasn't perfect. He was still fallible. Notice that in Luke 9:51-56, that when they were talking about, I can't remember the account exactly of what they were doing, but he goes up to Jesus and he says, do you want us to call down fire upon those people for saying those things? So kind of rash. We think about Peter almost being that way more, but John's kind of the same way. Notice as well his mother, maybe because of their prominence in the community, they say, look, I want my boys to sit on your right hand and your left hand, right? I want them to be in a position of power. So maybe it's just his mother's input in that, but maybe along the line, kind of looking at that idea of, all right, we're somebody, let's be somebody in this kingdom. Of course, Jesus is saying you don't know what you're asking by asking those things. Another thing to note with John, and this again helps us when we begin to read these, that he had special experiences. Now, when we get into 1 John, and he's saying that which was from the beginning, right? The things that we beheld and the things that we touched. And that thing, he said, look, I know I saw Jesus, but look at the experiences that he saw. Janus's daughter, he only carries, again, usually the inner circle, Peter, James, and John. He'd be one of those men. The inner circle is sometimes called. But he sees Jesus raise his daughter, again, only being the ones being able to go in and see this. Again, Peter, James, and John, the only ones going with him to the Mount of Transfiguration. Seeing Moses and Elijah there, he was a witness to that. So you think, okay, well, John's going to be creditable because he's seeing some of these things that other individuals were not able to see. Not only that, he is with them when his disciples come to him privately, and he kind of tells him about the destruction of Jerusalem. He is present in that as well. When he goes into the Garden of Gethsemane, again, he carries them in, but again, remember, he goes out a little further, and he takes that inner circle, Peter, James, and John. He goes in there with those men, and then he goes a stone's throw further to pray. John is present with him in the Garden of Gethsemane. So these are all things that are important that are going to attribute there with John. Notice, he's there at the Lord's trial. He saw it all the way through. Jesus called him. He was through all of this. He saw a lot of stuff, and he even saw the empty tomb. So we can credit John with a lot of things that he was present for, eyewitness to, as he attests, as he gets into his letters. And again, he outlived the other apostles. He was the only one that would die of natural causes. He outlived them all. So I don't know if that's a blessing or not, but nonetheless, he was there. All right, any questions or comments about some of the things, the background of John, or a slide you'd like for me to put back up there? All right, here's the date and the place of the writing. Again, this is somewhat important because as we begin to write some of the events that are happening, but ultimately it may not be too stressful, so don't get too carried away. But traditionally, again, 90 A.D., if that's the case, then it's after the fall of Jerusalem, and he is in Ephesus. Again, many men write speak about him being there in Ephesus. We know he was in Ephesus after Patmos, and many think that this is where he was doing his writing because he was there in Ephesus. Again, Jerusalem's destroyed. No reason to go to Jerusalem, so he's gone to Ephesus. Possibly before the persecution of Domitian. So the events in the Revelation, kind of looking towards that, maybe this great persecution that was going to come to the Christians. It is important to note that wherever he may fall on the line is that some time had to have passed away, come from that, because you begin to see this great influx of false teachers coming in and influencing Christians. And that's what he's going to write about in 1 John with these false teachers coming in and the idea of the antichrists that would be coming in. Again, a plural, not looking for one, but these people who are against Christ, because you have we'll get into that word, but the Gnostics, gnosko is the Greek for knowledge. They are the knowing ones, and they say that Christ, I can't remember exactly how it is, something about he quit being deity on the cross or something, I'm not sure. But anyway, they're going to come in and start teaching these things. So that's what John's going to be talking about. So let's get into this and the theme of the book, and that's kind of, this is really neat when we look at this. What is the book about? So when we discuss this in class, the idea when we study, when you read through 1 John, I would encourage you maybe take and start jotting down all the times you hear these words, because what we're going to find is if you read the King James Version of the Bible, you're going to see love, the word love, and again, this is from the King James translation, the word love is going to be 35 times. No, that gnosko is going to be 33 times, world 22, children 15, and life 14. So if I had to ask you, right, if maybe you haven't read ahead on John, sorry about that. What are you doing? Oh, no. Sorry. Okay, there we go. Don't try to touch that. If I were to ask you, what do you think the book of 1 John is based on, just by those words up there, if I can get it to stay up there? Any thoughts? All right. Yeah, obviously we're looking at love, right? Love is a big part of John's letter. The idea that we are to know certain things. And again, I made the comment, if you're unsure if you're saved as a Christian, John's going to reassure us of some of this. But obviously the world, right? There's some dangers with that. So this is a good way to look at a theme of a book, because he's going to be using it quite a bit through there. Now, if you look at, no, it's a little smaller, I'm sorry, but if you look at the Greek, because again, you may read the King James, you may read New King James, and they may use that word differently in that, or even a newer English translation. So if you look back at the Greek, now, again, a love being either as a noun or a verb, you've got 46 times. Again, to know is 25, God 23, world 23. Remain, that's a big one for John. Remaining, abiding, 23 times. Sin is 17, life 13, faith 10, light 6. So John is really, again, love is going to be a lot. And that's why when we attribute him to being an older man, looking at that with the idea that I said, all right, he's showing this love. He's wanting them to know these things, that God is love, kind of like what Miss Misty's saying, right? All of these things, the dangers of the world, that's what we're going to be looking at. I think. All right, that's the last slide I've got. So I'll leave that up there where we can get some of that. Any questions, any comments maybe there with the introduction of John, or 1 John? All right, well. All right, again, we're not going to dive into the book just yet, but we will be looking at, again, we'll just kind of be going verse along the way, so I would encourage you to stay reading ahead. Like we were talking about, it's 5 chapters. It's not too long a book to read, but I would encourage you to do that. But again, look at the just the emphasis that John's going to have, because we're going to see a great emphasis on knowing and the things that we can know, and that's what the Gnostics. I don't have it. Let me see real quick. We got a few minutes before we're even top at the hour. So let me see if I can pull something up as we're waiting here. Let me pull that down just so I'm not distracting you too much. But when we're looking at these words, again, this Gnostic idea that they were the knowing ones is, I didn't want to get too involved with that, but let me just kind of see if I've got a minute to. That's what I need. Okay, yeah, that's a good, thank you, Miss Misty. Yeah, that's along the same line as we're looking at, again, the idea of agnostic. I'll kind of show you here the Greek word. I've got it in my notes, but I can pull it up real quick and try to show you, try to help you along the way. Yeah, I think the agnostic is we don't know. That's I think the A negates the Gnostic there, so the idea that, we can't know, right? So when you're looking at this, let's just kind of pull this up here on the board. That's really small, I'm sorry if you cannot read that. But again, you have love. Love dominates the letter, right? It's a test of genuine faith. Let me see if I can just, it's going to be too wide, I'm sorry. I'll try to get it just as wide as I can up here. But anyway, the idea, again, that's going to prove, and we're going to talk about loving each other and loving our brother. And if we love the Father and we don't love our brother, then love's not really in us. So it's going to be the test of genuine faith. If again, kind of like we were talking about in the worship hour, if I claim to be a Christian, but I behave myself in another way, then that's probably not really being one. This abiding, meno, there in the Greek, again, the idea of fellowship, obedience, assurance, abiding. And when you read John 15, right, when you're abiding in the branches, if you're abiding in me, that's going to be, that's really what we're going to be looking at, is making sure we're doing these things. There's your one, cosmos. If you want to do, I know Misty said at one time, taking my Greek, that's why my instructor told me the other day, he said, you need to teach them, Ben. If you'll get better, you can teach them. And I said, I don't know. But cosmos, we think of cosmos, the space, the world, right? That's the world. That's going to be the Greek word for world, and that's what he's going to say. Frequently, he's using that, contrasting the children of God and the children of the world. So we're going to see this great contrast. Again, the gnosko, this last one, the relationship of knowledge, understanding, right? Better than just, okay, well, that's what it says, but what does it really mean? We're going to get into that. But thank you, Miss Misty. Yeah, the gnosko, the agnostics, same thing. How can we know? Harmatia, the sinner, is going to be there again. He's going to be in a relationship of the believer with sin. Again, if we say we have no sin, what does he mean by that? When we talk about if we do sin, we have a propitiation, or we have an advocate. He's our propitiation. When we get into chapter 3, I think it's around verse 4 or 9, we get into some interesting, let me see if I can just look it up. We got about 5 minutes and we'll be done. So, it's like the one born of God cannot sin. That's a good study there. 1 John 3:9, whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin, for his seed remaineth in him, and he cannot sin because he is born of God. So, if I'm born of God, then I can't sin. But again, we look at that and say, okay, well, what does that mean? But just previously, John has told us that if we say we don't sin, we have no sin, then we're a liar. So we'll talk about that as we get further. It's really, if you're born of God, you don't continue to sin. That's what he's getting at there. We'll look at some of that way the Greek words are broke down with their verbs. That's a lot. If anything, if I teach you of the Greek, maybe we can look at that through this, is the idea of the verbs. It's not so much the word, but it's the verb and the idea of a action I'm doing right now, a past action. If it's a continued past action, action that has happened in the past, that's what we look at there in 1 and 7, walking in the light. Or if we walk, that's a present active, right? I'm presently, actively walking in the light. That's what the idea there. And then continually cleanses us, that ETH there. So anyway, that's some good stuff, right? The blood of Jesus Christ, the Son, cleanseth us. It's a continual action that's happening to us as we are continually walking in what God commands us to do. So there's a lot of good in that. And we may look at the verbs, just parsing those out a little bit to kind of help you understand what he's saying, because that's what, when you get into 1 John 3:9, the idea, it's not that I cannot, that I'm unable to sin, it's that if I'm born of God, I'm not gonna continue to live in sin. So we'll get to that. Any questions, any comments, anything through that? Any direction you'd rather go instead of that? Or emphasis on one or the other? Pull that back down. You can get those in your notes if you want to. Okay, well, there you go. That's got it then.